Again, thank you so much for doing this. Tanya, I really appreciate it. Going back to due diligence and escrow. And, something I've learned a long time ago is the buyer I open up escrow with is the buyer that I want to close escrow with.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
the due diligence part, depending on the complexity of the deal, the size of the deal, some are easier, some are smoother, some are shorter, some are longer. But typically, I'd like to get as much due diligence done as possible before I go into escrow because I don't want any hiccups doing escrow after we open up escrow and then the buyer wants to back out and says, I'm not paying for escrow fees. You guys, whatever reason, I want you guys to pay for the escrow. Or sometimes they'll split the escrows when the buyer decides to pull out. So you said that this really delays the deals if you do a lot of due diligence up front. Do you think that's a bad idea to do like most of the due diligence up front? Or I guess that what I'm trying to frame is the question is how much due diligence do you get done in the deal before you go to escrow?
Well, I personally do some preliminary due diligence before I ever take a listing.
Mhm.
So I already have the tax returns, the profit and loss statements. I already have that stuff so I can set up a data room quickly. I've already pulled down, their information from Secretary of State if they're a business entity. I know who the directors and shareholders are, or not shareholders, but I know who the directors are or who the managers are, the LLC. I've pulled down a lot of that stuff. In terms of due diligence, when you get into the nitty gritty of it, again, it's going to depend on the size of the deal. Um, so from my side, like you, John, I agree. Once I have a signed purchase agreement, I've got a buyer, that's the buyer I want. That's the buyer I want to close escrow with. And so I think in general, if I'm working with multiple buyers, I'm trying to give them enough information so they can determine to whether or not to make an offer. Like I had a deal a couple months ago. I don't know. I'm closed maybe last month, maybe the month before. I can't remember now. I think last month. But we had three buyers for the business, and so I was talking to all of them about submitting offers. One of them wanted to submit an LOI. I said, well, we can do that. But, you know, I said, if the seller's receiving two offers and one LOI, guess which one goes to the bottom of the pile. So, but again, it depends on your state. So since we're a licensed state, we can do actual purchase agreements. So I ended up getting all of them to actually do purchase agreements. And then we were countering back to them. Well, during that whole time, I mean, all three of them had access to the same information. I made sure all of them I set up a data room. They all had access to the same data room. I had a video interview with the seller. They all had access to that. If they submitted any additional questions, I did another, Q&A with the seller on those. Or if I forwarded questions to him from buyers and he sent those written responses back to me, I created a Q&A document to put that in the data room so that all of them would have the same information. And then that way, he basically was able to, we had meetings with each of them while we were still negotiating the offers and before he made a decision. And then he finally made his decision on who he wanted to go with. So at that point, it was like, okay, this is it. And this is who we're going with. And yeah, we wanted their money in escrow within 3 days. So I think, the buyers weren't able to do a ton of due diligence. They didn't have their attorneys involved yet. They didn't have, because when you think about it that way, until their offer was accepted, they wouldn't want to hire an attorney.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They wouldn't want to be paying their CPA, but they had access to the financials, the tax returns, and everything else through the data room. So I kind of do it that way. It's I guess somewhat of a hybrid. I mean, they get to do a lot of the financial due diligence before the offer is ever accepted or before the offer is written, really, because how do they know?
Exactly.
It's just like when we take a listing, how do we know how to price it if we don't have the tax returns, the P&Ls? We can't do the recast. So we, in my opinion, have to provide that same courtesy to the buyers. And there's nothing that makes me crazy more than having somebody come to me and say, oh yeah, I was trying to buy this business, or I was trying to help a buyer buy this business, and the listing broker wouldn't provide any financials at all. And it's like, well, they said we'll provide the financials after you write an offer. I'm like, well, how are you supposed to write an offer based on what? You know? So it's a little crazy, some of the expectations out there. But yeah, I mean, I think that the escrow instructions follow the purchase agreement.
Yeah.
So as long as the purchase agreement is okay. And then I know you said something about, if they cancel the escrow and then there's a negotiation over the fees. The purchase agreement that CAB has basically says that the buyer can cancel during due diligence and get their deposit back less any escrow fees and costs. So the escrow, it's already in the purchase agreement that buyer is not going to get their, that the buyer's funds are the only funds in escrow. Escrow is going to get paid. The escrow company I work with doesn't, they'll charge a small cancellation fee. It's pretty minimal. But if they have out-of-pocket costs, if they've done UCC searches or caused UCC searches to be done, or if there's a bulk sale notice to creditors, all that kind of stuff that actually has to be paid for. I mean, that'll come out of the buyer's thing. And then if the buyer wants to, I mean, they can always try and take the seller to small claims court if they feel like the seller is, if the seller's the one that decided to cancel the escrow, they can always, we can negotiate that. And I usually do, although it's rare that a seller ever tries to cancel an escrow. But if it happens that way, then, I will talk to the seller and say, hey, look, you're the one bailing, so you need to make good on the escrow fees and costs, because a buyer shouldn't be out of pocket on this. So it's just one of those things. If they say no, contract says otherwise, like, okay, but, sellers or buyers probably going to take you to small claims court. So why don't we just not do that? It's a couple grand. Let's just get it done.
Absolutely. And be done with it. Absolutely. Don't
Yeah.
touch the deal. Could I do a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So you had mentioned part of your comments was that you create the vault room and you put a whole bunch of stuff in there. One of the things that you mentioned is a video interview with the seller.
Yeah.
Did you conduct the video interview with the seller yourself? Or did you hire an outside firm? And how long is typically this interview is for?
Yeah. So the video interviews with the seller that I do, I don't put in the vault room.
No.
That's a no. So here's the way I do things. So when part of my marketing, after I've taken the listing, I tell the seller, okay, one of the things we do is we do a video interview, and it's Zoom. I mean, we're just doing a Zoom meeting and we're we're recording it. And I have a video topic list. It's got about 15 different questions on it that are things that I used to put into a sim. But people don't like to read anymore.
Okay.
So I have a question, it's like, well, tell me about your ownership structure, your management, your employees, your management structure and employees. And then they'll talk about, their shop foreman and whatever it is, right? Depending on the type of business. So I just have those topics, the way I do it is we'll just go through. It's very conversational. I'll ask them a question or say, hey, tell me about this. Tell me about that. Tell me about the background of the business. How'd you get into this line of work? So it's very casual, very conversational. And then when it's done, usually it takes 45 minutes to an hour. And then I send it to my assistant and he chops it into small videos and he creates a web page, accordion web page. So basically you have the questions or, about or background and history of the business. It might be topics, it might be questions, depending on how I did things in that session. But basically so when we do send out, after somebody sent us an NDA or signed the NDA and we send them our sims are very brief now. kind of presentation bullet point type information. But in that email, we also say, and there, for additional information, there's video interview with the seller, and we send them the link to it. So that video interview page is in a site that it's not in my not in our website. It's in a separate site that is very obscure, that is not searched by search engines. That the homepage to it says, if you don't have a link, you shouldn't be here. I mean, and literally somebody has to have a link, or they're just not going to find what they're looking for, because it's confidential information, right?
That's right. And,
We're sending that out after the confidentiality agreement has been signed.
and what is your success rate with the sellers doing the interviews? I mean, is it like almost
Oh,
100%?
I've only had one seller that didn't want to do it. But well, that I shouldn't say that. I've had a couple sellers that didn't want to do it, but did it anyways, and then were really thankful that they did. I can tell you that this one that I had the 3 offers on, the interview is what got all those offers, because they, the buyer, all the buyers love it.
Yeah.
They hear the story exactly. So you can't give them the story like I said, people don't like to read anymore. You can't give them the story in a written document. The other thing about the videos is, because they're segmented, the buyer doesn't have to sit there and listen to an hour-long thing. Basically, they can look at the list of topics and they can say, oh, you know what are the strengths of the business? Let me see that. And that might be a 3-minute video. Or, the weaknesses of the business, the opportunities. I mean, so you have those things in there, and it's fairly simple for the buyers to just jump around, or, they can go back to it anytime. They can also go back to it, 3 days later and say, yeah, I forgot what he said, but it was really interesting. Let me go back to that. But they're not having to bug the seller about it. And that's the beauty of it. And the way I tell the sellers is, look, I'm going to do a video interview with you. I can send you the topic list in advance if you want, but this is not anything that's going to be rehearsed. It's just a casual conversation. And what it's going to do is it's going to allow us to provide a lot of additional information to buyers without you having to repeat over and over and over and over to, if we got 15, 20 buyers interested in your business, you don't want to have those phone calls 20 times.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, the buyers, so the sellers, it saves them a lot of time, everything else. Buyers love it, because by the time the buyer actually gets on the phone with the seller, they already feel like they know him.
Yep.
They already know the story of the business. They've seen them, they've heard them, so for the seller, it's a little bit new experience of figuring out who this buyer is. But for the buyer, they feel like they're friends, so it's really an awesome thing.
Can I mention my experience with videos? I like the videos a great deal. And for all the reasons you said, because the buyers and the sellers have to connect at some point. This gives an early connection. So you don't feel bad by saying, well, you can't talk to them or come up with excuses. But they get to, vet the seller a little bit that way too. And I always tell the sellers, I said, this is your opportunity to, you're going to speak to prospective buyers. You don't have to be smooth. You don't have to be a good salesman. You just have to be yourself, because that's going to be what they meet when they see you anyway. Yeah. So some buyers, I'm guessing, might think, wow, I like this guy. I really want to do this business. Or another one might say, they seem kind of dumb. I can do this business better than they can, But I've just had really good luck with it, and from that standpoint, and I've never had any sellers balk from this on this, even though they say they don't interview very well, or they don't like to do videos. It's just something I click on, like Zoom. I use Google Meet, and I just record it. It's pretty simple, and there's aspects, like Tanya said, you can index them and so forth. It's not that hard. It takes a little time. I think you have a team that does that, don't you, Tanya?
Yeah, I've got an assistant that'll take care of
Yeah,
segmenting it and creating a web page, and then he'll basically just send me the link after he's done. He'll send me back the link, say, okay, here's the video link for the one that you just assigned to me. So it doesn't really take him that long. I mean, usually if I send him, the video and ask him to build the web page, I mean, he already knows kind of the topic list that we use, but he'll get it done almost always the same day for me. It just doesn't take that long to do it.
Mm.
So it's a good thing. So John, shoot me an email if you want the video topic list. I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
And then you can tweak it and make it your own. Add to it, subtract from it.
I will.
Whatever you
Thank
wanna
you.
do.
If anybody
Okay.
else wants to request that, can we, Tanya?
Yeah, of course. Just shoot me an email.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
They do.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, hey, I mean, there's so many deals out there. I mean, that's the whole point of this. We all need to share information so that we can all do more deals, help more business owners, right?
Yes.
And ultimately, that's what we want to do, is help these guys transition over to the retirement for those who want to retire, and not have to worry about their business.